Welcome to the live stream. We'll be starting shortly. This is just a quick sound test. Welcome to the live stream. We'll be starting shortly. A quick sound test. Okay, we're starting the stream shortly. This is a quick sound test, and we're going to test some of the different views. Everything's looking okay. Hello everybody and welcome to the live stream. This is part 14 of the Spreadsheet Skunkworks series, where we are trying to, give me a second, just going to mute this audio. Part 14 of the Spreadsheet Skunkworks series, where we're trying to learn lots and lots about Excel VBA by building a chess computer. And this is what I call my infinity project. Clearly the project's never going to really end because we can always improve a chess computer, so it gives us endless scope for improving our VBA skills. So, but if we're meeting for the first time, I'm Chris. Thank you so much for tuning in. And my kind of mission in my professional life, and certainly with the YouTube channel, is to get people using Excel more effectively. And through my own experience, I've, as I said, experienced the power of Excel. I wasn't into Excel at all until I got into kind of my mid to late 20s, and learning Excel, particularly learning Excel VBA, had certainly a career-changing effect, and to a certain extent a life-changing effect. Had a massive impact on what I was doing, allowed me to start my own little company, to have the YouTube channel. And the mission of all of this is to get people to have the similar experience to what I had, really, although that sounds kind of selfish, but hopefully you can understand what I mean. When I'm working with customers, I work on in-person projects here in the UK and overseas. I'm trying to get people to experience those kind of magical moments that I experienced when I thought, oh, if I just do that, everything gets so much easier. And we have this idea, I have this idea that if you learn the right techniques, you can get this disproportionate benefit. So it's not a case of spending days, hours, years to learn Excel. If you can be pragmatic about it and learn the right stuff, it can have a really, really big impact. And you can start experiencing those kind of magical moments when everything goes really well. So that's the mission. Just going to have a look at the chat and who is in the chat today. We've got Deepak is in the chat. Welcome. I believe it's your first time. Very happy to have you. Maureen is tuning in again from the USA, from Michigan. Good to see you, Maureen. Thank you for tuning in. Who else we've got? Michelle is here. Michelle, how are you? Great to see you. Michelle's a long-time supporter of the channel. Lovely to see you from Philadelphia, of course. And then Steve is tuning in. You'll remember Steve from some of the previous live streams. Steve lives over in Berlin and I'm in Nottingham at the moment. Well, technically I'm not in Nottingham. I'm actually between Nottingham and a place called Melton Mowbray, in a beautiful part of the country which is called the Vale of Belvoir here in the UK. And the weather is kind of warm and windy. I'd say we've had a bit of rain today. So let me know in the chat. I think we said last week, people tend to lurk on live streams. I do it all the time. There's YouTube channels where I've watched 200 videos without leaving a comment. I'm trying to change that a bit. So I'd absolutely love to hear from you. So just let me know in the chat where you're tuning in from, and then let me know your questions, of course. And Deepak said I managed to pronounce his name correctly. Fantastic stuff. Right, with that said, let's get into one of our Excel views. And here we are, back in the Skunkworks, and we're building up our chess computer. You can see we've got a chessboard here, and we're in a situation now. I'm just going to switch over to the other side of the screen. We're in a situation now where we can click on some of the pieces, almost all of the pieces. We're going to try to finish this today. Click on some of the pieces and find where the pieces can move, with some limitations that we'll talk about in a second. For example, I can click on the rook here. I can see the possible rook moves. Click on the knight, see the possible knight moves. Click on the king, the possible king moves, and let's try the black bishop as well. So this is working pretty well, but you can see there's a few limitations here. One obvious limitation being, well, if there's a piece obstructing the way, so we can see the pawn here on square d7 on the chessboard, and cell f4 in the spreadsheet is blocking the bishop's path. So the bishop wouldn't be able to move in this direction. So that's something we've got to start thinking about, how to program in if there is a piece obstructing the path. How are we going to do that? And this has been kind of ticking over at the back of my mind. When I have a difficult programming job, a difficult task, I like to think about it, and then it just kind of, my mind ticks over the course of days, weeks even, and then gradually it kind of works towards a solution almost subconsciously. So this is what I've been subconsciously thinking about, if that's not a contradiction in terms. How can we work out to do these moves where there's these kind of pieces obstructing the way? Not sure if we're going to get there today. And then there's numerous other challenges we've got to think about too. Good. So king, bishop, knight, rook and pawn moves are done. So we're going to think, sorry, not pawn moves. Pawn moves are not done. We're going to think about the pawn moves today. And we've got our pawn here on square e2 on the chessboard. So we're going to think about how to program those moves. So what are we going to do? Well, as always, it's about getting the conceptual thinking right first. And then it's a bonus if we can use an existing coding structure and adapt it to get it working. Now, from our approach, we can see we've got quite a lot of repeated code here. And, you know, there may be an alternative approach that avoids some of this repeated code. But broadly speaking, each of these kind of little paragraphs, if you like, each of these little sections of code is describing one type of move. And we can see the utility of having these annotations here. So this little piece of code is describing the straight line moves. We've got the king moves. Then last week, if you tuned in last Tuesday, we looked at the knight move. So we've got a kind of repeated structure. So always, we're not just going into this blind with a blank canvas. We're thinking conceptually, how is it going to work? And then also, do we have a structure that we can kind of recycle? We can reproduce and then tweak to get it working. Another feature of this file is we have interaction between the VBA editor, interaction between the VBA editor and a table in the spreadsheet, which is another feature of powerful Excel files. And why don't we start here with our coding? Remember, you can download this file from the website, work along with me. I'm going to look to do this every Tuesday for the rest of the summer. And one thing I didn't mention, this is probably the last video I'll do in this room, in these surroundings, because this has been a kind of temporary setup using this room. We have a new office that's just been completed. I've just been testing the electrics today. We had the electrician come round. He installed the electrics, got these beautiful white walls, lights. It's going to be great for filming. We're going to be in the office, hopefully from next week. So let's get it into the file. So now we're talking about pawn moves. Can do pawn move, question mark. And then we've got to think again, we're still in the conceptual world now. We're thinking, well, what kind of moves can a pawn do? Well, a pawn can move. A pawn can move one square. Let's just take this pawn here. A pawn can move one square if it's not on the second rank, of course. So if it's in the middle of the board somewhere and we click it, then we want the next square ahead of the pawn to highlight. That's the one possible move. But if the pawn is on the second rank, and in this case row 9 of the spreadsheet or rank 2 of the chessboard, then the pawn, of course, is able to move 2 squares ahead. Okay, so we've got to program 2 different rules there, and we're going to treat these. Are we going to treat these differently? Well, I'm not absolutely sure. Let's see how it goes. But we've got 2 different rules to program there. We've got moving 1 square ahead or moving 2 squares ahead. So we're going to continue our structure here. So we've got our column, can do the pawn move. And so we've just got to say yes for the pawns here. So I'm going to put a Y in. Flip over to the other side of the screen a second, because this stream is, the main topic is Excel VBA, but I want people tuning in who are not into VBA or just into Excel generally to get some value out of it. Steve says the new office sounds epic. Yeah, it looks pretty good, Steve. Looking forward to getting in there. I'm sure we're going to do some streaming in there at some point. Yeah, so it's not just about VBA, day to day. What's the one thing that everybody can do, including you, Steve, that everybody can do to improve their Excel? It's using keyboard shortcuts, using the keyboard more efficiently to navigate the file and to input data. So for example here, I'm going to put a capital Y here. Now what are we going to do? Are we going to do this? Just working down the cells. Even worse, you can probably hear the mouse clicking now. Are we going to click on the cells with the mouse and then do the input like this? You know, lots of people out there doing this. I'm not being patronizing. I used to do this. You know, I'd say half the people who use Excel would do it this way. There's a much easier way to do it. So once you've got the Y in there, you can then hold down the Shift key on the Windows PC, and there's very close Mac equivalents to these shortcuts, but I'm holding down the Shift key here. Now I've actually got my eye over on the left side of the screen, which is in this area over here. I can see which rows are being highlighted, and I want to go down to row 11, which is where the pawns are. And I'm just going to hit Control D. Control D, that's auto fill down. So let's do that again. So we've got a Y in, hold down the Shift key, and I'm hitting the down cursor down to the last pawn, Control D. Now, if you can start using keyboard shortcuts, it's going to de-stress your Excel sessions. It's going to get you thinking about what the purpose of your task in Excel. It's going to get you focusing on the task rather than focusing on trying to get Excel to work. So this is the one thing everybody can do to improve their Excel. Now we're going into the ends. Let's just scroll down a bit here. Okay, we're going to go all the way to the black pawn now, and then Control D, and then I'm going to just copy paste down, replicate this structure. If you like replicate this structure, I mean, just doing a copy paste really. There we go. Okay, I'm just checking that, and it looks reasonable. Yep, so we've got the first pawn there, going down to the last black pawn here. Okay, looks reasonable enough. Right, anything from the chat? Steve says, yeah, I'll probably do that cell by cell. Indeed. I mean, this is the thing with Excel. You know, there's people saying, I haven't got the time to invest in Excel. It's too difficult. I'm not a computer programmer. I don't have a degree, or, you know, things like maybe I'm not a man, you know, therefore I'm not a computer programmer. This is for everybody, and everybody can do something to get better today. So learn a keyboard shortcut. Today, I learned a keyboard shortcut. Okay, I learn one a day. Every time I use Excel, I learn a keyboard shortcut and I write it down. Good, so we can do a pawn move. Now, I think last week, I'll ask you a question now. Last week, we anticipated a problem that we're going to have. We're just going to have to fix something here. Right, we've got our little piece of code here. So what's going to be the problem here? You know, what are the possible limitations here? I mean, when I'm doing client work, I always write down the assumptions that I use when I'm doing the programming. And we could just look at this code, and if you're a fairly experienced programmer, you could see what some of the limitations are. You can see what some of the problems might be. Like with any coding approach, there's pros and cons. And as you move through your coding career, you're going to move from becoming somebody who's kind of ideological, saying you have to use code or you have to use formulae, to somebody who's practical and pragmatic and says, I could use code, I could use formulae, I'm going to think critically and choose the best approach for this situation. So any approach has pros and cons. Now, possible limitation here. I'm looking at this named range we have, E moves table, and I'm seeing that I'm doing a lookup. So we're calling the VLOOKUP formula from the VBA editor. Super cool technique. We're doing a lookup here, and then I'm looking at these numbers. We've got 5, we've got 6, we've got 7, and we've got 8. And I'm thinking, there's a vulnerability here, because how big is this table? How are you managing the size of this table? How many more columns are we going to need? And we can see now we've actually got to the end of this range. I'm just going to move over to the other side here. So we're going to top left corner, select E moves table. And then we can see where the named range is pointing to. We can see, yeah, we'd have a problem. It simply wouldn't work if we were just to move on to the next column here. So we need to make this range bigger. I'm going to go Alt-MN on the Windows PC. That takes us into the named manager. So I've got to find the name I want to change, and it's this eMoves table. Then we've got to ask the question, how many columns do we want to go across? And you might say, well, Chris, that's easy. Let's just go to the end of the worksheet. Then we never have to think about it again. We could have any number of columns. Okay. What's the drawback to that, do you think? What's the drawback to that one? Why should we not select the whole sheet in a named range? It's funny, I know Steve's listening. Let me throw this one in. Steve and I do a podcast about teaching, which is called the Alone Upfront podcast. And it's for teachers who haven't had formal teacher training, which is how I do my teaching. I haven't had a lot of formal teacher training anyway. So yeah, we were speaking in the podcast about asking questions, just like I asked a question there, asking questions to groups of people and then not having much in terms of response. And well, nobody's here, so I'm not expecting a response, although there's a few people in the chat. Anyway, if you want to learn some strategies for how to deal with that situation, the Alone Upfront podcast is on Podbean and available now. Anyway, feel free to answer my questions in the chat, but I'm going to move on. And yeah, so we've got to select a sensible range here, and let's just go to column R. In fact, let's go to column Z. Okay, I'm going to close that, and then Excel, yep, just ask for the confirmation, change the reference, yep, and then I'm going to remind myself by going to column Z now. Where are we? Column Z, okay. Alt-HBR on the Windows PC, Alt-HBR just gives me the right border there. And then I'm going to say extent of eMoves table name. There we go. So that's just a little reminder for me as we're building up this table. Once we get over there, then, you know, we're going to have to think about changing the size again, just as we've done. So just a quick discussion there about managing the size of named ranges, and it's always about the appropriate balance. You know, there isn't a perfect answer. It's about being aware of the pros and cons and finding an approach that works for your situation. Anyway, so now if we select eMoves table, what's going to happen? Well, we can see we've got a much bigger selection now, so that's useful for us. Okay, so we can now think about copy pasting some code down, Control C and Control V, and we're going to say pawn move here. So here we've got pawn move, and now, yeah, now comes our conceptual thinking. We've got to be crystal clear about the concept and then try to translate that into VBA using the concepts we've already created. You know, we've got our variable here, row count variable, that's counting up and down the rows. Got our col count variable, that's counting across the columns. So in the language that we've created in this VBA routine, we've got to translate the concept into the VBA editor. Any ideas for how to do this one? So we can see previously where we were doing a night move. Yep, this is how we kind of translated the logic, if you like. And then prior to that, the previous video where we had a king move here. And this is how we did it. And here, you know, if we translate what is written in VBA into English here, then we're saying if the square we're looking at is one square away from the king, then this is a king move. Yeah. So this is how it's working. We're looking at it in VBA. We've got to translate it into the concept. So for the pawn, well, if the square is one row above, and I'll explain this looking at the board. If the square is one row above, then that's a possible pawn move. So we're going to take this task and simplify it. We're just going to look at the one square ahead move first, rather than trying to look at that 2 square move that the pawn can do on the first move, let's just assume that the pawn can only do a 1 square move first. Okay, Tony's just checked in here. Tony says, sorry, I'm late to the party. Yes, Tony, we're partying. Excel VBA party happening right here. Now, welcome, Tony. I think you sent me an email. Yeah, I believe you sent me an email asking when you could tune in. So good to hear you're here, Tony. And the question of the day, Tony, is where are you and how's the weather? So let us know. So the pawn move here. Okay. So let's try this. Okay. So row count equals 1 is going to be 1 square away, effectively. Okay. Okay, yeah. Maybe we'll simplify this and then simplify this so I can avoid these errors, and then we'll build it up again later. Okay, let's get rid of this all for the time being. Okay. Don't need this abs either. So call count is going to be 0. Okay, and yeah, row count equals 1. So where is this going to get us? Any ideas? Any ideas in the chat? So what I've just created there, what kind of highlighting is this going to get us on the board? So we're going to click on the pawn in a second, and I think we're going to get some squares highlighted. But we never quite know with Excel VBA. Don't need these brackets either. So what do you think is going to happen? Tony says, not so sunny South Wales. Yep, Tony, I'm in the Midlands. And yeah, not so sunny here today, although the sun does appear to be coming out now. Right, so let's save the file, Control S, going to hit the pawn here. Okay, nothing so far, and nothing so far on the top either. So what might be happening here? I can see the problem. Right, remember we've got this number that I was referring to. Yeah, I've just forgotten to kind of update that number for the new piece of code. So we're going to tick that over to 9. Remember that number is saying column 9 in the E moves table range, and we can see this is the E moves table range 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So 9 is column K. Seems to be reasonable enough. Control S, save the file. Back to the board sheet and hit one of these. I'm just going to reposition this pawn. Seems to be out of position here. Just pulling this down using the drag handle. Then hitting the pawn. Okay. So we've got the square behind the pawn highlighted. Okay, so this seems to be good for the black pawns, less so for the white pawns. Okay. Should be rows 3 and 4 highlighted right. Steve, we're going to have to keep working through this. Yes, it will be rank 3 and 4 on the chessboard. So just here, rank 3 and 4 on the chessboard when we click on the pawn eventually. Hopefully we'll get there by the end of the video. Cool. So what we're seeing is when we click on the piece, then we're getting the square below is highlighted. That's okay for the black pieces, less so for the white pieces. So let's do some experimentation here. Let's change this to -1. And then let's have a kind of hypothesis. What's going to happen? Well, now we'd expect the square above to be highlighted, which will be good for the white pieces and not so good for the black pieces. Okay, so we've got a solution that is not accurate, And we've changed it to another solution that is also not accurate, but we've understood the behavior. We've been able to manipulate it in a way that we can predict. That means we're, building that understanding. Okay. Let me know in the chat, are you following along with this? Ideally, you would download the file yourself. You download it from the website. Go to the website, go to the articles, and then page 2 of the articles is the Spreadsheet Skunkworks article. You can find there, you can download and work along with me. Okay, so we need to distinguish between the white and black pieces here. We need to distinguish between the white and black pieces. So what ideas have you got? Okay, seem to be offline now. I wonder what's happened here. Okay, no, I think we're back online now. Okay, I think we're back online. Okay, Pankaj, welcome. Pankaj Sharma, welcome to the chat. You're asking for the videos to be dubbed in Hindi. Interesting. Interesting idea. Well, if you know somebody who could collaborate with me on that, that's certainly something I would consider. I have looked on YouTube, and there seem to be lots of, thank you Steve for saying the stream's working, there seems to be lots of Excel VBA videos in Hindi, in some of the Indian languages definitely. So I think there's already quite good coverage, but maybe you just want your tiger stuff in Hindi, who knows. Anyway, let me know if you want to collaborate on that, Pankaj. You can send me an email. Right, so any ideas for distinguishing between the black and white pieces here? Well, how might we do it? Now, I seem to remember, I think we have, yeah, this is what I was kind of banking on. So at the beginning of the routine, we take the name of the piece and we save it to a variable. Remember, a variable in Excel is just a place to store information. We want to take some information, use it later. We're going to store it in a variable. What information is going into this piece name variable? Well, we can see from this line of code here. So this is the name of the shape, and the name of the shape is already listed here. I'm just kind of remembering this from previous videos, but I'm pretty sure it's accurate. So we've got all the names here. So can we say to VBA, how are we going to articulate this? What's the concept and how are we going to do it in VBA? Well, if we can say to VBA, if the first letter of the piece name, and remember the piece name we're assigning to a variable here, if the first letter of the piece name is W, then it's a white piece. Equally, if the first letter of the piece name just down at the bottom of your screenshot is B, then it's a black piece. How about that for some logic? The concept's fairly clear. Now, the technical part, can we translate that into VBA? Okay, good. Stream is still working. Excellent. So how are we going to do that? Right. Let's kind of test this in a controlled environment, if you like. So what I'm going to do is, okay, I'm going to put a message box here. I'm going to say left, the left function in VBA. So the left function allows us to take the left portion of a text string. In this case, we just want the first letter. Then what do we want to look at? We want to look at piece name. And then we just want to have the first letter here. So, and I'm going to make this a kind of contained test by just saying exit sub here. So this is another neat testing technique, and you're probably seeing, hopefully you're appreciating, testing is so important. I spend so much time testing, and the key message with testing is spread it out through your coding session. Sprinkle it across your coding session so you're not doing it all at the end. You want to test as you go along. That's the way to keep the stress level down. Last week we spoke about once you reach a critical stress level, the session's over because you're in a bad mood, you're stressed. Keep the stress down by doing regular testing. So what's going to happen here? Well, hopefully a message box is going to flash up with the first letter working from the left, the first letter of this piece name variable, which is just going to contain the name of the piece, and the name of the piece is here. So we're just expecting a W or a B to flash up, and then critically, and this is what I want you to think about doing in your coding, we've just put this exit sub line of code. So we should have the message box flash up, and then Excel is just going to quit the routine. That's what this exit sub line of code is doing. Okay, so let's give it a go. Control S, save the file. So we're expecting to click on a piece here, click on the pawn, and we've just got a B flashing up there. Seems to work well. Does it work with the white pieces? Clicking on the pawn there seems to work well. Does it work with another white piece? Yes, seems to work well. That's the code we've used for the testing there. Now we've got to incorporate this code that we've just created into this kind of long phrase that we're creating here. And what do we want to say? Well, if this little text string, this one character text string is a W, then it's a white piece. Then we just need the underscore there, I believe. Yes. Okay, so we're saying, yeah, I'm just going to say if this is a white or black piece. Yeah, because this line of code we're creating here, we're going to kind of duplicate it for the black pieces in a second. Right, so this should distinguish between the white and black pieces. So what happens now? So nothing happens when I click on the black piece. That's good. Clicking on the white piece, good. White piece again, good. White piece again, good. Okay, let's right click on the piece using the drag handle. Let's go and push it somewhere else on the board. Clicking the pawn, and we can see, yes, the square is highlighted there. So seems to be working well. Let's reposition the piece here. Okay, good. So it seems to be working for the white pieces. Now we've got to try to get it working for the black pieces here. And here we're going to have to put everything we've just created into some brackets. Just like this. Okay, and then we want to repeat this effectively. Okay, so we want a little OR here, and then repeat this. So I'm definitely expecting some noise from the VBA editor here at some point. How's that looking? Reasonable enough? Okay. So on this line, sorry, I've just obscured the code here. Good. So on this line, we're talking about the white pieces. So on this line, we're going to be talking about the black pieces, because the black pieces are going in the other direction. So we need slightly different code. So the W is going to become a B for the black pieces. And then this row count variable, well, the row count is controlling the rows. So up and down the board, that vertical movement up and down. So we want the one square in the other direction. So rather than -1, we just want 1 there. And you can compare to row count here. You've got -1. Right. How is this looking? So this has got complicated, definitely. And it might be that it doesn't work and I have to take it apart again and then just build it up step by step. But this looks reasonable enough. Reasonable enough. Control S, save the file. Pawn works. Pawn works. Pawn works. Good. Seems to be working well. So how about we put 2 pawns in towards the middle of the board. Some hand-to-hand combat, the middle of the battlefield. There we go. So click on either one. Works well. Works fine. Good. So we're happy with that mechanism, but we just raised another critical question there, which is a pawn. A pawn's move to capture a piece in chess is, of course, different from a pawn move just to move forward in chess, because a pawn captures diagonally. So if there is a piece on this square, the pawn will be able to capture it. If there is a piece on this square, the pawn will be able to capture it. It captures diagonally going forward. So that's something else for us to think about. How are we going to program that? I mean, I think that is unique to the pawn, because all of the other pieces, they capture in the same way that they move, but the pawn captures in a different way, which means you have pawn structure in chess, which means you have kind of the feel of a front line, if you like, and it gives this kind of feel of a battle because of the way those pawn moves work. So that's something for us to think about there. So we've still got a few watching, a few hardy souls going deep into the VBA. So yeah, let me know what you think and what are we going to do next in the chess challenge here. Good. Gonna have a quick break and just tell you about what I'm doing day to day. So I'm really trying to kind of ramp up the video content for Tiger, and the kind of big picture is that I want to move the company from doing in-person consulting, which is what I do and what I love, and I really do value the people who work with me, try to do the best work I possibly can. But long term, I want to move towards being more of an online training company, doing things like YouTube, having online training courses, and particularly having an online business learning community. And this is what I'm looking to do. I think there's a big kind of gap, or what would you say, a kind of lack of fairness, if that's not too strong a word, in terms of how people can access business education. You know, how do you access business education? You know, what are your options? Well, if you work for a big corporation or a big organization, yes, you might have some training options. You know, they're not always the best. Sometimes they're very good. You know, it can be variable, the quality you get that. What other options have you got? Well, looking externally, you might be able to go to a business school and get some education there, do an MBA or something like that, but that could be prohibitively expensive. So I see lots of people out there, and the YouTube channel, my YouTube channel is kind of a proof of concept of this. There's lots of people going out there who want to learn about business, computer programming, business analysis, and VBA, and that need is not really being met. And I'm trying to meet that need with the YouTube channel, but with the YouTube channel, we're only just getting started, only just scratching the surface. I want to build this up into a business learning community. So those people who don't work in big organizations, those people who can't afford or are not inclined for some reason to pay, they can tap into a community and get some real high quality business education. So that's kind of the 5-10 year plan. And what I'm doing now is just really ramping up the online content. Just try to build this community, you know, genuinely, to try to touch more people with what we're trying to do, trying to create more impact, trying to help as many people as possible. Best way to do that is by doing more content. So as usual, I've gone on a massive speech, but what I was trying to say is I do daily videos. I do daily videos on Instagram and on Facebook. You can find us on both those platforms, Tiger Spreadsheet Solutions. Doing daily videos on there, and 3 videos a week on YouTube we're doing at the moment, including this live stream. And yeah, just really trying to ramp things up. So yeah, thank you so much for tuning into the live stream. Really appreciate your support, and hopefully, well, what do you think about that little speech, about that little vision I set out? You know, do you think there's demand for that? Is that something you'll be interested in or not interested in? Really appreciate any thoughts that you have, and I just appreciate you being here, being part of the community. Right, anything in the chat? Good. Pradeep said, good, it works. Excellent. There's some people working along. This is brilliant. There's people working along in the chat here. And Pradeep says, it's good, it works. Keep it up, bro. Let's keep it up. And Cyrus too says, great job. Thank you very much for your comments, guys. But we're not finished yet. We've been going for about 40 minutes. So let's see if we can do something else. So this pawn move. Chess players out there will know that when the pawn is on its starting square, is on the second rank of the board for the white pieces, the pawn can move 2 squares. The pawn can move 2 squares. So how are we going to program this? Any ideas in the chat? We need to say to VBA, we need to say to Excel, if the pawn is currently on the second rank and it's a white piece, If the pawn is currently on the 7th rank of the chessboard and it's a black piece, then we want to give different movement options. We want to give it 2 possible squares as opposed to 1 possible square. So people in the chat, any ideas? Any ideas for how we're going to do this? Again, I do have some ideas. Going back through the code. So when you've got a tricky situation like this, it's good to go back through the code and see what have I got in my toolbox? What have I previously used that has been helpful? And we saw earlier on in the video, I went back, found this piece name variable that we used for something and then used it again for something else. So I didn't create any additional complexity or any additional load on the processor by creating another variable. I found a variable we're using anyway and used it for something else. So could we use this current square variable? Interesting. Current square variable. So what information is this giving us? Well, it's telling us the address of the cell that the piece is currently on, using this awesome little piece of code. You know, when I found this, it was another earth-shattering. It was just so good finding this, because it created the link between an object on the sheet, so a shape on the sheet, and the actual layout that sits behind it, the grid lines. And I'd never thought that Excel could kind of fit those two together, but Excel can tell you if you have a shape on the screen what cell it's in. How it does that, I have no idea. Clever guys at Microsoft, credit where credit is due. Fantastic stuff. So we can harness this property of the object to tell us the current square, and we're particularly interested in if the current square is in row 9 or if the current square is in row 4, because that means the pawn is on a starting square. That means we have different rules to apply. We want to be able to move forward 2 squares, not just 1 square. Yeah. Cyrus in the chat says it's helpful not just for the chess game. Exactly, that's right. So this series, you know, I do like chess, but you know, I love coding more, and it's not really about the chess. It's all about 10% more, and before you know it, you'll be making real good progress. It's more about the process than it is about the chess. So let's just go really simple here. I'm going to use the same testing technique. We want to kind of externalize, flash up the value that is in this current square variable. And we're going to use the same technique here. So message box, variable name, and then exit sub is just going to exit the routine without doing anything. Okay, click this pawn here and we can see G4 is flashing up here. Click this pawn here and we can see F9 is flashing up here. Fantastic stuff. So Excel can tell us the row that we're in here. Can we do more than that? Let's see if we just, let's suppose we just want the row. So we got the address, you know, with the dollar signs, as you just saw. Suppose you want to simplify, we just want the row. So I'm going to say the range, the variable name, and the row. So it's going to take that information from the variable, which might be E4. It's going to put it in this, it's going to express it, if you like, with the other language I've put in here, range, variable name, dot row. It should flash up just a number. So let's have a look. Yeah, we've got a number flashed up there. Just had to pick up my pen, which I just threw away accidentally. And then there we go. Good. Okay, so we've got this row. Got this row information. That's helpful. Okay, now again, we're thinking about assumptions here. We're thinking about assumptions. We've got the row information. So we could say to Excel, yeah, so if the row is 4, then we're on a starting square. Say to Excel, if the row is 9, we're on a starting square. What would be the downside of that? Can anybody see the limitation there? As we discussed at the beginning, you know, any code has limitations, but, you know, I'm more comfortable with some than others. I'm not particularly comfortable with this one. Well, what if the board were to move? Which could happen in the future. We might decide, oh, we need some more rows here for doing something, or we need some more columns over here for doing something. If either of those two things were to happen, then yeah, we wouldn't be able to rely on this line of code anymore, because 4 would no longer be a starting row. The starting row might be 6 or 7, and 9 would no longer be a starting row. So is there a more sustainable approach? Just a little more complexity, but full of complexity. I think we're getting quite a lot of value, so it's worth looking at here. Let's try this. Okay, and sign. Okay, what do you think about that then? Okay, so maybe somebody in the chat. Good. Yeah, Steve's all over this today. I mean, Steve's a great example. He's a good student. You know, he's got some Excel skill, using Excel a lot, and he's just tuning in, just understanding some of the concepts, just the conceptual understanding. Absolutely loving that, Steve. Yeah, Steve's absolutely right. If we put that code in, then we would assume that the chessboard is at a fixed location. Chessboard might move. Yeah. So what might a better approach be? You know, even if you're not into this technical stuff, you know, even if you've not learned any VBA, you can benefit from learning the process and some of the programming concepts there. Sorry, Steve. I said Steve hasn't got not much Excel skill. You know what? The skill level doesn't matter. All that matters is your attitude. You know, if you gave me 2 students, you got one very experienced coder with a kind of unenthusiastic attitude, or you got somebody who knows nothing but is a good learner, I would take the second person every time. It's all about your attitude to learning. Good. So let's see what happens here. And hitting the pawn here. Right, 7. Good. So we've got a 7 flashing up now. Now, what's happened there? Can anybody see what's happened there? There we go, 2. It might make it easier if I just change the value in this cell here. There we go. So this line of code is going to flash up whatever is in column B, just here, whatever is column B on the row that the piece is on. That's logical explanation, and we can see it in action here. So I've just put a 7 back here. There we go. And then, yeah, we hit the P and the 7 comes up. There we go. Hit the pawn down here. Then the 2 comes up. So this approach for me is better because we're saying, Steve says, is it some kind of dynamic system? But reference to what? Good question. It's not really dynamic. It's not so dynamic, this system, but we could claim it's dynamic, I suppose, by arguing that, yeah, now whenever the board goes, it's going to work wherever the board goes. Okay, well, that's a slight exaggeration. If there's additional rows added and the board moves down the sheet, this is still going to work as long as we take these numbers with us. So it's given us a bit of flexibility there if we should subsequently need to change the location of the board. You know, that's such a common task for me. I'm just thinking what I would have to do if we wanted to change the location of the board. I think one of the videos in this series, I'm just going to change it anyway to show you the process we'd have to go through. We'd have to go through all the code and tweak it all probably to get it working for a different location. That's assuming we have a suboptimal approach. An optimal approach would be fully dynamic and would allow us to put the board anywhere and the code would still work. I think the approach we've followed is kind of semi-dynamic. We would say some elements are dynamic, some are not, and we'll do that in a later video. It will be boring, seem boring, but there'll be so much value in that because that's exactly what happens on projects. You know, you spec out the project, these are the requirements, then you put together the file. 3 weeks later, people are like, oh, we can do this. Okay, let's move it over here. there's a big structural change, then you've got to get back into the VBA editor and, you know, work on the code where it's kind of suboptimal. You don't have full dynamic quality. Good. So hopefully you're enjoying some of these discussions, coding discussions that we're having. Right. So we're happy with this here. Okay. So if it's a black piece and the value in the B file is 7 and it's a pawn, then it must be on the starting square. Okay, how are we going to do this then? I think we're going to have to, yeah. It would be possible. Yeah, it would be possible to kind of build up this code further to incorporate this additional logic that we're dealing with now, but that would make things too complicated for me. I'm going to take the hit here and I'm going to have more code, but it's going to be easier to understand. And I'm going to keep my annotations up to date. So pawn move 1 square. There we go. And then we have pawn move 2 squares. Just here, okay. Right. So again, we're very kind of deliberate and as precise as we can here about where this piece of code is going in. Okay, we're going to need, okay. Yeah, we're going to need another and in here. Whoops. Okay. Let's grab this from up here. Yeah, I thought that would happen. Right, I'm going to take this down. Okay, pop this in here. We're going to need an additional line. You know what, I think I'm going to go full screen here. Right. So this is the white piece, so this value is going to be 2 here. Okay, let's go through this. So these conditions here, we're trying to express if it's a white pawn, that's on the second rank of the board. Okay, yes. So this is going to be 2 squares away now. There we go, 2 squares away. We need that adjustment. Yeah, the col count is going to be 0 because it's going to be on the same column. If it's a white piece, we still want that. And if it's on row 2, we still want that. Control S, save the file. Back to the VBA editor. Before we test this out. So excellent question from Steve here. In fact, I'll pick that debate up at the end, Steve. Love the question. I'll pick that up at the end. The question is, so you'd say it's always worth going the extra mile to future-proof your Excel development, even if this takes more time. Discuss 2,000 words. Excellent question. What ideas do you have about that? Sometimes we just need to get things done. Sometimes, you know, it's 5 o'clock on a Friday, we need a solution. Other times we can sit down, be more strategic, and can we invest some time at the beginning of the project to save us a lot of stress later? That's our debate. Maybe we'll cover that in a bit more detail at the end. Let me know what you think in the chat. So should be able to just hit the white pawn now, and we're expecting to have 2 squares highlighted here. Okay, so I've forgotten to switch off my previous testing up here. Anybody in the chat pick me up on that? No? Come on, guys. Here we are. Control S, save the file. And then back to Excel. Okay, 2 squares, love it. 2 squares, love it. Looks good. So let's push the pawn forward 1 square. What do we got now? Now we've got 1 square. Perfect. Okay, so it looks good. Let's do the same thing with this pawn. let's push you right up here to the 5th rank. Do the same thing again, and we have 1 square. Seems to be working. Seems to be working for the white pieces, but is it working for the black pieces yet? I don't think so. Oh, it is working there. Okay. Well, I'm pretty happy if that's all working already. Then just hitting the drag handle here. And what are we expecting now? We're still up 2. Okay. Right, so we can you see the problem there? So that should just be a single square move. So this square, D3 on the chessboard, F8 on the Excel grid lines there, cell F8, that square shouldn't be highlighted. So we just need to make a final tweak to the code here. Can anybody take us home? Take us home by just making this last selection here. Steve's got another good question here. What happens if you put a white pawn on row 7? Maybe we'll do that in a second. Does anybody know how to... Tough question, particularly if you're just tuning in. But does anybody know the tweak we need to make? Yeah, I think I've got it. The tweak we need to make to complete this task. And this kind of thing, you know, we're talking about how to access code. If you don't know a lot about Excel, you don't know a lot about coding. This question you can answer just from looking at the shape and understanding the shape. Yeah. So here we've got a shape. We've got about the same length on these 2 lines. Just looking at the shape here, we can see we've got 2 different lengths. So that's out of balance. There's something missing. And yeah, we know that the first line of code, which relates to the white pieces, that's working well. So it must mean, you know, just by kind of logical deduction here, it must mean that this second line of code, we're missing something there. So let's just take it down. Easier said than done, as always. So Control C. I think we need an and here. Got 2 ands. Okay, reasonable enough, I think. But for the black pieces, remember, the black pieces start on, yeah, the pawns start on rank 7 of the chessboard. So this value of 2, we've got to change to 7 here. Then we should be good to go. Okay. Right, let's just... so if I click on this pawn now, we've got 2 squares. Good. If I click on this pawn now, we've got 1 square. Excellent. This pawn, 2 squares. Let's take this pawn, move it forward 1. Move it forward 1 square, and we've got 1 square there. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that. Pretty happy with that. So we've made a bit of progress there. Done a nice coding session. Managed to keep the stress levels down. How do we keep the stress levels down? By being very steady and systematic with what we're doing. Small chunks, not saving all the testing for the end. Testing as we go through the process. Managed to make a little bit of progress there. Still lots more to do, of course. We've got to think about, when we've got pieces blocking the way, that's ticking over kind of in my subconscious at the moment. I haven't got a solution at the moment for that. And then we've also, what we might look at next time is if the pawn is going to capture a piece. So for example, if the white pawn was here, the pawn would be able to capture the black pawn, of course. The white pawn would be able to capture the black pawn. So our programming doesn't currently account for that. That's going to involve something new, because we're going to have to, somewhere in our programming, identify which cells contain pieces. Maybe that's something that we can do on the engine sheet. We can hopefully put a new column in here. It's working. Good. It's about going the extra mile to future-proof your projects. Excellent question. Steve says, what happens if you put a white pawn on row 7? Let's do it. White pawn, row 7. There it is. Okay, what happens now? Yeah, and we've just got the one possible move there. So because we've articulated the logic, clearly, yeah, Excel's able to understand that. I'll just do that again. Pawn on row 7. And we can see we've got just a single move there. There we go. Okay. Good. So, yep, Tony answered Steve's question there. Thank you, Tony. Good. Yeah, and Tony quite rightly says, what about queening? What about queening? Oh, it's a nightmare project. So, yes, when the pawn gets to the end of the board, in chess, when the pawn gets to the end of the board, the pawn can you can swap the pawn for another piece, which is called queening, because you usually create another queen that way. So that's something for us to think about. Maybe that's something we'll ignore for the time being, Tony. Maybe we'll ignore that for the time being, try to incorporate it later. I suppose I'd argue that how many games of chess actually involve a pawn queening? Well, not all of them, maybe less than half, you know, in my experience. So maybe we could look at programming that in later. Just thinking about the implications of that, Tony, because our whole structure, we've got the engine sheet here. Our whole structure here really assumes that we only have 32 pieces on the board. So what if we had 2 or 3 queens on the board? Then we've got to think about how we're going to put additional pieces into our table. This is the table on the engine sheet that's really controlling everything. So great question, Tony. We will get to that. We will get to that soon. Tony says castling too. Yes. I think to begin with, we're going to go for a cavalier approach, aggressive chess without any castling. We're going to go all out attack. Later on, we'll have to look at putting castling in as well. Good question. And Steve has cheekily asked, what about en passant, which is another move in chess, of course, that we've got to think about. That one, we're definitely saving that one for later too. Right. I think that's all the questions in the chat. So thank you so much. Thank you so much. We've had around 10 people for the whole time. Absolutely pumped. Absolutely pumped that people have tuned in. And had a great question. Yeah. So Steve's saying, what we're dealing with here is a real life project. And we just had a great example there of Tony throwing in a requirement. You know, what about queening? Yeah. What about the pieces castling? And you could say, well, at the start, in order to get started. So we're trying to navigate a course that does a sensible amount of future proofing, but also puts us in a situation that's manageable and that we can make some progress. And the discussion that we had about the position of the board is very kind of instructional, is informative in this case, because we could set it up so that wherever the board is, our code is responsive to that. But that would be a more complex approach. You know, you might not have time to do that. You know, that would certainly be stretching my kind of capability in coding. So you've got to make some simplifications, make some assumptions. And then I think the key really is to be in a constant dialogue with the client. It all comes down to communication really at the end of the day. You know, like I've been communicating with you in the chat today, you've got to be having constant communication with the client. And this is how I run my projects. I run my projects in an iterative way. Yeah, in an iterative way. Usually I'll do half a day's work, 1 day's work, then I'll get back to the client. And when I speak to the client, I'll say, this is what I've done, and these are the weaknesses of my approach. So I've assumed the board is not going to move, for example. I've assumed something else. So you've got to be transparent about the limitations. Now, that should lead to a conversation and should lead to you identifying what the big issues are going to be early, and you can design them out early. So I would say, you know, what level of future proofing should we do? We've got to draw a balance, but the key really is to be interacting with the real world situation, interacting with the customer and getting as much information from them. That's going to allow you to kind of pitch that future proofing at the right level. to make sure you're not doing lots and lots of unnecessary coding for things that are not going to be used, but also to make sure that your approach isn't too simple and that what you're creating isn't sophisticated enough. So communication is key there. I have a video which is called Your Complete Guide to Excel Spreadsheet Projects, and I think there's a 10-minute version on the YouTube channel, and there's a full version that I send to you when you sign up to the mailing list. So if you go to that video, go to my channel. It's called Excel Spreadsheet Projects, Your Complete Guide. There I talk about the project management aspect, how you should manage these chunks of work, be communicating with the client and managing their expectations as well. Fantastic stuff. Right. I will see you next week, guys. I'll see you next week for more from the Skunkworks. Thank you so much for tuning in. See you soon.